Hello, today we are going to talk about Operation Hannibal and what that was. So let's move forward. Operation Hannibal begins January 23rd, 1945. So this is the final year of the war. The war will end in May for Germany of 45. So we're just 5 months away, not even 5 months from the end of the war. Now, Operation Hannibal had been planned already. This was a plan to evacuate German civilians, German military from Eastern Prussia, Poland, as the Red Army advanced, as the Soviets advanced. It's actually called into effect at the time. And so this map, I have to say, I have to give a shout out. This is map, and I don't have the person's name, but it's somebody whose grandfather at the age of 13, this was their escape route for the same reason that they were fleeing the Red Army, the Soviet Army. And so if we look at what was prior to World War II, right? East Prussia, which becomes part of Germany, all right? So after World War I, the German Empire was split up, and Poland was given sovereignty, right to self-rule. That was one of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And so we formed the country. Austria-Hungary was also divided, and that's where you get Czechoslovakia, and that's why you have Hungary and Austria as separate nations. And you have East Prussia. So Hitler's reasoning or excuse for going into Poland was that he was just trying to get to East Prussia, that he was trying to unite all of the German-speaking states. And what he really wanted was that Danzig corridor. And so if you look where Poland is and you look towards the top there, you'll see there's a little part that goes out into the Baltic. And that's what he wanted. He wanted the water control. He wanted access to the water ports. And so we'll look at these towns with the stars on them as we go to the next map. So this is what Eastern Prussia, then Germany, occupied by Germany, looked like in January. All right. And so the red, the maroon color is going to be the Soviet army and how they're advancing. So if you notice, it's darker red up in that very top corner, right? And then it's a little bit lighter red, and that's where that army's advancing. So think about the people that we're reading about. They know that the army's advancing. So they might be in an area where the army hasn't quite advanced, but all around them, they know it's either going to be German soldiers or it's going to be Soviet soldiers advancing onto them. And so if you look at the dotted line from Königsberg on down, that is a track of a real person at the age of 12 as the family goes. And it says, Herbert and Gerard briefly disembark the train. So there was still a train running, trying to get people out. The train hears of the Soviet army breakthrough, and the train just stops. Like everyone's just left for themselves and abandons them somewhere along the train line, and this family is able to get out and head west. But if we look at Pillau, right, and it looks like it's out in the water, there's that little archipelago, and then we have Kohlberg. There's also another archipelago coming around, right, and what would have been the Danzig corridor. And so Kohlberg is going to be in, Danzig is going to be in Poland. And then look by January 25th. All right. So by the time that they are announcing the start of Operation Hannibal and starting to evacuate people, people have already been moving. They've been fleeing. A refugee is someone without a home fleeing, right? And so German citizens, Polish citizens, any citizen is fleeing the Soviet army. There's no way to protect yourself. German citizens, German army members are fleeing. They've been given the orders to evacuate. And if you notice, what are the Soviets doing? They're enveloping them. So they're pushing them towards the ocean. This is going to be equal to what happened to the British at Dunkirk. Right. So here is a picture on January 24th, I think it is. These are people just waiting, and just look at the teams of people and realize, of course, this is a small snapshot. So, if you will, think about Alfred looking out and seeing these people. He mentions about all the people, and I could help them. I might not, right? He's going to be the hero doling out oranges to the people. But look at these families. What they're carrying is what they own. They have sacks. You have all different people here. It's a young child right above where my head is. I see, looks like a young boy uh, carrying a sack, and it is freezing. This is one of the coldest winters on record. All right, so they go to they're trying to get them to German occupied ports in Denmark. That's where they're trying to get them to, which is outside of where the Soviets are. So the easiest way is going to put them on some ships, get them out. And again, if you study the Dunkirk evacuation of the British in the beginning of the war, coming out of France, Dunkirk, France, how Winston Churchill was famous because he got on and he called everybody to help. People with fishing vessels, people with commercial vessels, ferries, military vessels. The numbers are between 500 and 1,000 different vessels are going to be used to evacuate people of all different kinds. So on the 30th, 3 ships, the Wilhelm Gustloff, which is the subject of our book, the Hansa, and the whaling factory ship, the Walter Rau. So it was a factory ship that had been converted for people. Wilhelm Gustloff had actually been a cruise ship that Hitler had created for German citizens. It had sailed many different places, named after the Swedish ambassador or Swiss ambassador, I can't, Wilhelm Gustloff. There's several pictures of it you can find, and I'll show you later on in the story about the Gustloff. It was a beautiful, beautiful cruise liner. So these are the 3, and this is what the first group of ships that's going to head out. The Gustloff, the Hansa, and the Walter Rau are going to be the first very large ships that are going to take the first people out with Operation Hannibal. Here's a photo of people crossing the Baltic Sea. And again, if you've ever seen photos from Dunkirk evacuation, it looks very much like it. The only difference is there's no airplanes bombing them or strafing them overhead. Here's civilians at Palau. And so this is similar to where our people are heading. Notice the ice on the water. This is in January 45. It's a little bit hard to see, but if you look right above my head, that's actually a big liner. That's a big merchant vessel, military or merchant vessel. So if you look carefully, you'll begin to see it, but it's so gray. And I think this also helps with the story, right? It says that at the Junker house, the mansion, the chimney was coughing out smoke that was grayer than the gray sky. And so this is a good example of the grayness. And if you've ever been in a heavy snowstorm during winter, you'll know what that's like. And here you see civilians, and you see these smaller ships that the people are boarding and getting on, and you see the ice that's there in the harbor. Here's some people leaving East Prussia. Notice right here next to me, if I can do this right, I always do this backwards, right? Okay, no, there we go. Right there next to me, you have a woman with a very young child. You see other children on the ship. There's one next to that officer. Very, very cold. A lot of the German ships, they were running short on supplies. They ran short of fresh water. They ran short of coal. So they couldn't go as fast as they needed to. They ran short of food. And so on this trip, a lot of elderly people and very young people died during the evacuation just because the Germans had become so short of supplies at this point. Here they are fleeing Königsberg again, loading onto a ship. The overcrowding. Here is a ship disembarking. I'm not sure what ship it is, and they're disembarking in Denmark. At this time, this is a British officer that's actually greeting these people who have evacuated. So in the time that it took the ship to get to Denmark, the British have pushed the Germans back to Berlin. So the overall effect is one of the largest evacuations by sea in history, definitely larger than the British evacuation of Dunkirk at the start of the war. And again, if you're a historian, you probably like looking at these coincidences, or again, history repeating itself, history making those mistakes, right? What happened? There was such a loss of life at Dunkirk. It just wasn't planned. They weren't ready to pick them up. The supplies that were left behind because it was an immediate evacuation. Same thing's happening with Germany. Germany's leaving, and they're leaving everything they have. I mean, the German military, if they can, they're getting on one of these ships because this is the best way out. So the evacuation actually lasted for 15 weeks. The estimate between 800 and 900,000 civilians were able to evacuate. 350,000 German military were able to evacuate. Sadly, the Goya, the Wilhelm Gustloff, the General von Steuben, and 158 other vessels were lost at sea. Most of them were lost because of Soviet torpedoes. So Soviets had U-boats and they were using them. They knew about the operation. They were in the water. They knew that there were civilians on the ships and they were targeting them. By the way, General von Steuben, I'd have to check to see if this was a German ship or not. Probably Prussian at one time. It's probably a Prussian ship. So General von Steuben is actually, excuse me, a Prussian officer who helped in the American Revolution. He was critical to the American Revolution. He came over, volunteered through a letter of referral from Benjamin Franklin to the Continental Congress, and helped train the Continental Army at Valley Forge. In fact, General von Steuben's training was so well done and so precise and so well organized that the U.S. Army used his training methods, his Blue Book of Training, up into the 1800s. And so General von Steuben is an American Revolution war hero. I think it's, again, coincidence of history that it was lost. And of course, we have to think of the people that were lost, the innocent people that were lost. So again, to show you how desperate Germany was to evacuate that area, here's some German soldiers building rafts in March of 1945, and they're going to try to cross the Baltic Sea on these rafts. So again, if I want to make an analogy here, this in a way makes me think of Cuban refugees leaving Cuba. You've got your back in the water at this point. You know that it's either try this and be successful, try this and fail, or if you stay, you know what's going to happen to you. You're going to be killed. The Soviets were taking great revenge on the Germans for how they were treated at the end of World War I, and how what they had gone through and the losses that they suffered with the different sieges that the Nazis held on them on the Eastern Front. So at 2100, on 8th of May 1945, the last day of the war, last convoy consisting of 92 different vessels, less the Latvian village of what is now Libau, with 18,000 soldiers and civilians. So this also tells you the amount of people in the German military that were occupying that Eastern Front. This is, again, Operation Hannibal. And if you are just looking at this video, join us for a book talk on Salt to the Sea. If you're reading it, I hope that you continue to think of this. This is that tie-in. This is that tie-in with historic fiction. And so this is the truth of the story. And we know what's going to happen to the ship that these people are getting on. So as we're reading, I know it's very difficult for me when I was reading, because that's in the back of my mind. And I know what's going to happen to the ship. It's not a guess. What I don't know is what's going to happen to the characters as they board the ship and as we head to the end of the story.